Hi friends! Today on our virtual field trip I am bringing you to somewhere special. So I want you to take a look behind me and try to listen to the sounds around me and guess where you think I am. I'm going to give you 3 hints. The first hint is you could swim here if you wanted. The second hint is there is water. And the third hint is there are animals that live in the water. If you guessed pond, you are correct. Today I'm going to be reading to you at my pond near my house. So let's get started. Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. This is a scholastic book, and they gave me permission to read this to you today. And before we get started, I have a question for you. I want you to ask yourself, what kind of animals do you think live at a pond? They could live in the water or around the water. And as we read, I want you to listen for the different animals in our book. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on. So now we know that there are ducks, which are also called mallards. Mallard is a type of duck. There are turtles that live in some ponds and foxes that live around some ponds. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it, the very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so down they flapped. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. Enormous means huge. There was a huge bird that came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the mallards followed them all the way round the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. So I want you to take a look at this bird on the boat. Do you think it's a real bird? It's on the boat and there's someone sitting on it. So I want you to ask yourself, do you think that's a real bird? Let's read to find out. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed down on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But "Look out," quacked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. "You'll get run over." And when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies. With all of those horrid things rushing around, we'll have to look somewhere else." So remember, horrid means scary. What do you think could be scary to a duck in this picture? If you said the boy on the bicycle, you're correct. They were scared of him. So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Remember, ducks need water. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." Ducklings are baby ducks. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest, and only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All of their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. So molt is kind of a funny word. That happens whenever the ducks lose all of their feathers, and then they grew new feathers. So they are molting. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. So I want you to help me count the eggs. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Mrs. Mallard laid 8 eggs, and there will be 8 ducklings. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack. I want you to use your listening ears here and tell me what you think that you hear. First came Jack, then Cack, then Lack, then Mack, and Knack, and Whack, and Pack, and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. What did you notice about all of those names? I want you to pause the video and tell whoever you are sitting with what you noticed. If you said they all rhyme, you're correct. They all start with a different letter. So Jack starts with a J, Jack. Then Cack starts with a K, Cack. And then Lack starts with an L, Lack. Mack starts with an M, Mack. Knack starts with an N, Knack. And Pack starts with a P, Pack. And Quack starts with a Q, Quack. They all rhyme. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. I'll meet you in a week in the public garden, he quacked over his shoulder. Take good care of the ducklings. Don't you worry, said Mrs. Mallard. I know all about bringing up children. And she did. She taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. So the bank is on the opposite side of the river, or the other side. There they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to the highway. What do you think's going to happen next? Do you think ducks know how to cross the road? Do they know to look both ways and to hold their mom's hand? Let's see. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk went the horns of the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, quack, quack went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack just as loud as their little squeakers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on, quack, quack, quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. What do you think Michael's going to help them do? He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. So he was waving them on, saying it's safe to cross the road now. He's helping them. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. I have another question for you. How do you think Mrs. Mallard felt when Michael helped her and her ducklings cross the street? I want you to pause this video and answer the question and then hit play whenever you're done. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud. She tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. So Mrs. Mallard was very proud and happy that Michael had helped her and her babies. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. Right on into the public garden. Who do you think's there waiting in the public garden for them? Let's see. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. Seems like they were very happy to help the ducklings. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long, they followed the swan boats and ate peanuts. So there's that boat I asked you about in the beginning of the book. It's called a swan boat, and there's a big swan on the back. It's not real, and then someone rides on it, and all of the people get to also ride on the boat down the river. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. The end. So why do you think that the little island was now a safe place to raise the 8 little ducklings? And why do you think it's important for them to be safe? Why do you think Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were so careful to choose the perfect place to raise their babies? Thanks, friends. I hope you had a great day.